My name is Ashley Lefwich, and here is my Module 1 Instructional Design Models. I chose to do Gagne's 9 Events of Instruction. This really hit home for me as it applies to what I'm doing right now in 5th grade in my classroom and in the brick and mortar part of teaching in general. So Robert Gagne was a World War II era American educational psychologist who is credited as the pioneer of the science of instruction. So in 1965, he proposed a series of events that addressed the mental conditions that are best or optimal for learning, and this really flows nicely with Bloom's taxonomy that we see a lot of times being harped on again and again in education. And here we have the framework of how these 9 suggestions, phases, whatever you want to call them, go together. These events, though, as you can tell, are very similar to a puzzle piece. They all intertwine nicely, but they need each other to fit and work well. So the first event that we're mainly going to talk about is attention, and attention is all about gaining the attention of your learners. Here is where you would identify as like the introduction or the hook, line, and sinker of your lesson. How are you going to hook your students in? How are you going to make them engaged and want to be a part of this learning? In e-learning, I would say this can be difficult because you aren't having that face-to-face interaction with students, but then in brick and mortar, you have the advantage of social cues, of looking at body language and personality to help with that. And then we have our objectives. Okay. Informing students of their objectives is just like beginning with the end in mind, giving students an idea of what they're going to be working towards. I like to use also an exemplar because that shows them what that learning outcome should look like, and I think that fits really nicely with this objective that Gagne states. From here we have prior knowledge. We are always wanting to not only build background knowledge, but stimulate the recall of prior learning. And this helps students make connections and then move on to the next topic of your content that you're teaching. So activating that prior knowledge is like putting on this thinking cap, like the little boy in the picture, and getting them engaged in their learning in a way that is personal for them. And from here we move on to presenting the content, addressing it to the students so that it's easily accessible, but also being clear and knowledgeable in the content that you're presenting. Guidance. For me, this is the guided practice of the learning models. It helps students learn how to learn, and it's very much the we do of a gradual release type lesson plan, whether that is e-learning or brick and mortar. And then with everything we have performance. So at some point in lessons, we have to make the shift from the I do, the modeling, what is this going to look like, the we do, it's very guided, we're doing it together, to the performance, the you do. What is this going to do for students? Sometimes it is more about the practice makes progress instead of practice makes perfect. But as you can tell with this visual, sometimes we have to miss the target a few times before we hit it right in the bullseye. And with that comes feedback. So with performance, with the guidance, you have to continuously add feedback. And that's why I like that visual with the puzzle pieces where everything is fitting together, because this can be including but not limited to evaluative feedback, peer evaluation that could happen when they're working together, self-evaluation, allowing students to self-correct, but then also things that are more constructive. Especially, we often think about constructive criticism, and that goes well with this feedback part, because if we don't provide that feedback, students won't know where they're at, how they're learning and doing, and how that all fits to their progress. And then, of course, sometimes the hardest part is to assess the performance. We can do this in pre and post tests to see how they are pre-learning, where they are after the learning, or even formative assessments that we're very, very familiar with, standardized testing as well. But this is a way to measure and see with that objective with that presentation of the content, the guidance, and the performance. How are students grasping the information that we're throwing out to them? And the final piece that I feel like is the most important is the enhance the retention and transfer to real world application. So how can we make the transition with students, or even how can students do this independently to enhance what they've been taught in the content to take it out to the real world? For example, if they're taking an agriculture class in high school, how can they take that to an actual agricultural career, and whether that's a veterinarian or farming of some sort. I even think about welding. My brother in high school took a welding class and was able to get certified as a welder when he graduated. And then he took those classroom applications and applied it to his career today in the Air Force. So now I'm thinking, okay, what does that look like personally in fifth grade math? How can my students take what we're learning with dividing decimals or multiplying fractions, and how can they apply that to everyday life? Here are my key takeaways, my summary, advantages, disadvantages, and application. So I feel like these 9 events of instruction can be modified to fit both the content and students' level of knowledge, which is very nice because we are not all a cookie cutter type learner. Some students don't even fit inside the cookie mold. Others are broader than that. They need something that is more free-forming. But it is important to note that this is applicable to both e-learning and brick and mortar classroom scenarios. Some of the advantages is the model is clearly laid out and well-defined. It gives measures and expectations without any leeway, I would say. Like, it clearly says that the content needs to be knowledgeable. It also says that we need to assess. We need to give that practice and elicit performance. But then one of the disadvantages I see, in my opinion, is that this approach is a lot more guided until we get to the assess piece. And I question, is it lending itself to allowing the learner to gain problem-solving experiences and skills that they will need to enhance their performance? But on the flip side also, it clearly must be successful if it's been widely used since 1965. So here's a few of my resources I use. I appreciate you coming to my presentation and hope to see you soon.